8:40 here. So just imagine looking at the Biden-Trump debate and thinking that it was a draw. But we have two columnists for the New York Times, right? Lydia Polgreen, Jamel Bowie. For them, it's just way too complicated to try to figure out who won the Joe Biden Donald Trump debate 3 weeks ago. All right, it was the worst Joe Biden debate performance in American history in presidential debates. It was a debate so atrocious, all right, that Joe Biden had to drop out, and Jamel Bowie and Lydia Polgreen, right, the two diversity hires, they thought it was a draw. Good tweet here. Imagine there is a debate performance so atrocious that eventually causes the sitting president to drop his candidacy, and you still claim that it was a draw. I mean, what planet do these people live on? Oh, now Trump's age and health under renewed scrutiny after Biden's exit. Wow.
This news story was written by Michael Cranish. Results, his weight, or other key information.
Right. They were not particularly interested in delving into Joe Biden's health and his cognitive decline and obvious senility. But now, front page, Washington Post, Trump's age and health under renewed scrutiny.
After weeks of intense focus on President Biden's health and age that ended with his withdrawal from the campaign on Sunday, the script has flipped. Former President Donald Trump is now the oldest presidential candidate in history, and one who has been less transparent about his medical condition than his former opponent. Trump, a 78-year-old with a history of heart disease and obesity, according to experts, has not shared any updated blood work results or...
Wait, I don't recall them turning to experts on Joe Biden's obvious decline into senility. Right? I searched Google Scholar. Right? I ransacked it. And all the articles that were about being unfit for the office of presidency between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they all said that Donald Trump was obviously unfit to be president. And the only articles that addressed cognitive decline said that there's absolutely no reason to believe that Joe Biden would be cognitively impaired when he reached the end of his first 4-year term. And it's now just painfully obvious that Joe Biden has been in dramatic cognitive decline for so long. And this was obvious back to 2018. Right? This is the Wall Street Journal on a killer anecdote from 2021.
How the bet on an 81-year-old Joe Biden turned into an epic miscalculation. Voters thought the faltering president was too old, but allies looked the other way. Advisors defended his abilities, and the Democratic Party boxed out other candidates. By Rebecca Ballhaus, Siobhan Hughes, Annie Linsky, Andrew Restuccia, and Eric Schwartzel. July 21st, 2024. 9:39 p.m. Eastern Time. President Biden had just finished trying to persuade a group of congressional Democrats to pass a $1 trillion infrastructure bill when Nancy Pelosi, then the House Speaker, took the microphone. In 30 minutes of remarks on Capitol Hill, Biden had spoken disjointedly and failed to make a concrete ask of lawmakers, according to Democrats in the room. After he left, a visibly frustrated Pelosi told the group she would articulate what Biden had been trying to say, one lawmaker said. It was the first time I remember people pretty jarred by what they had seen, recalled Representative Dean Phillips, D. Minnesota, who would go on to mount an unsuccessful primary challenge against the president. That was October 2021. That month was the last time Biden met with the House Democratic Caucus on the Hill regarding legislation. Nearly 3 years later, concerns about the 81-year-old president's age and mental acuity have put an abrupt cap on his half-century political career.
So remember, just a month ago, it was disinformation to note the obvious that Joe Biden was in dramatic cognitive decline. I remember all these news stories where they would castigate.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense of the United States of America.
Right, you pointed out Joe Biden's obvious senility and decline, and it was disinformation. We got so many examples here. Here's some
We
highlights.
shouldn't look at it as anything other than a Russian disinformation operation. But even if you're open to it, the substance of it is still the story of Joe Biden loving his son as he struggled.
Right, this is October 2020. Nicole Wallace giving the greatest commentary ever on the Hunter Biden laptop. Definitely Russian disinformation. Right, she's now just a month ago on TV saying that these videos of senile Joe Biden are fake.
Only Joe Biden looks good in hacked text messages. I mean, if anyone read some of what came out, they were messages to his son who was in rehab. And I think there are probably not a lot of people who look good in stolen communications that they have.
So I never heard about disinformation and disinformation campaigns, I don't think, till Donald Trump came along. All right, the media started employing all this new language that they brought out for Donald Trump. And of course, they would turn to expertise, all right, to be part of the elite, to show that you're part of the university educated good people. You have to engage in careful, critical discourse and use language as the elites use it, as the experts use it. And now we've got so many experts in disinformation, all right? Disinformation expert Sander Vanderlyn posted just last December that there was a well-documented false narrative that Joe Biden is senile, notably fact-checked as false. Right? These are people who make their living from being experts in disinformation. And what qualifies someone as an expert? You get other experts to say that you're an expert. Right? Another disinformation expert.
Disinformation is sabotaging America.
Usually, Barbara, we talk about disinformation taking place online, websites that somehow go viral, or from communist Chinese controlling TikTok and them pushing algorithms one way or the other. This is just out and out on the front pages of newspapers now, and it's also on Fox News. This is the disinformation and the constant lies that, in the end, benefit Joe Biden because they lower expectations for the debate. But it's still disinformation.
I think when people hear the Mueller report, they think about what he did or did not find about Donald Trump. But a huge part of the Mueller report talks about Russian disinformation tactics. And one of the strategies in 2016 was to make Hillary Clinton look old, look sick, look like she lacks stamina. That was one of the coordinated messaging points that Robert Mueller found was occurring between the Trump campaign and the Russian efforts to spew disinformation. And one of the themes this election cycle is...
Right. This lady published a book from a mainstream publisher with these brilliant insights.
That Joe Biden is too old to lead. And so everyone is seizing upon this. And it is a classic disinformation tactic to take a germ of truth. There is this video. He does look away. But as you point out, he is looking away to troops to salute them. But instead, if you edit it in such a way, you can make it appear that he fits this narrative, that he is slow, that he is wandering off. And so this is a tactic. I'm sure we're going to see it again and again. And I think the best thing that we can do is to prepare the American people for this false narrative.
So, in other words, shut up, peasants. You don't understand senility, all right? You don't understand right-wing disinformation and misleading editing. You're not smart enough to figure out this stuff on your own.
There's a growing and insidious trend in right-wing media, broadcast, print, and social media. It is to take highly misleading and selectively edited videos of President Biden directly from Republican National Committee social media accounts, and then use those videos to spread messages virally to cast doubt on President Biden's fitness for office.
Right, so this is the woman who was in charge of Sarah Palin, right, getting Sarah Palin ready for media interviews in 2008, Nicole Wallace. She did a great job with Sarah Palin and doing a great job now on MSNBC.
President Biden was out there literally representing America at the G7, saluting our troops, doing what he does as president of the United States. And look, we're going to see more of this. I mean, this is just the reality of campaigning in 2024. So we have to combat that disinformation. We have to hit it hard when it happens and make it clear that these are dirty tactics that MAGA Republicans are using because they can't run on the issues, Lemire. They have to use these dirty tactics like this because they are not right with Americans on the issues. So we're going to see more of this. We're going to do what we can to combat it. But it does take the voices of surrogates across the country. It does take the media to call it out. It does take social media platforms where a lot of Americans are getting their information to point it out as well. And President Biden was out.
So Morning Joe on MSNBC led the way in arguing that, noting that Joe Biden was obviously senile is disinformation.
Spooked, and part of it, what things they're spooked about is disinformation, misinformation, a late surge in social media. You're right about this effort internally called the Malarkey Factory. Dozens of people around the country monitoring what information is gaining traction digitally, whether it's
Right, this is October 20, 2020.
Resonating with swing voters, and if so, how to fight back. The three most salient attacks the Malarkey Factory has confronted so far claims Biden is a socialist, that he's creepy, sleepy, or senile. Explain how this works, and this is obviously part of Democrats remembering 2016 and those states we just talked about. They changed late, in part because of Trump activity and other activity, nefarious activity on social media.
Yeah, and the Biden campaign is very well aware of that. And so over the last 2 months, they've pretty quietly built up this multi-million-dollar effort that involves dozens of people around the country.
Okay, that's one thing. All right, that's campaigns. But when it comes from so-called experts,
constituents, again, I'm making the point that some of this may be mis or disinformation. The things that they are reading. I respect their views. A member of Congress, I would hope, would have independent views. That's what our Congress is for. So I'm not criticizing them for their views. I'm just saying, as a party, as a Democratic Party, and I am a member of the Democratic Party, we have to have a plan B if this action.
Okay, what's going on right now? Let's get a burst from.
Yeah, I'll say. And look, you would think the White House, Laura, would have at least sent him out walking across the beach with one of those killer dogs of his just to show that he's ambulatory. Then his brother Frank Biden said this to CBS.
He said, I'm incredibly proud of my brother. Selfishly, I will have him back to enjoy whatever time we have left. We asked him whether he feels that his brother's overall health and vitality played a major role in this decision. And he says, in my humble opinion, absolutely.
Look, listen to that line, Laura. Enjoy whatever time we have left. What does that mean? Of course, the Biden team then came out and said Frank Biden struggles with alcoholism. Ignore whatever he had to say. It's completely untrue. But look, he called in today to Kamala Harris's rally. Why can't we see Joe Biden? He doesn't have Zoom in Rehoboth. He was like the ghost of elections.
Right, so it's important to remember all the lying that we had. All right, let's get
there
more
could
from
be
Jane
the
Harmon.
point that some of this may be mis or disinformation, the things that they are reading.
Wait, I already got that.
Again, I
already got you on there.
One more point.
Okay.
There could be malign influence in all this. Disinformation, misinformation, much of it or some of it coming from foreign sources. I've talked to some very senior people in the administration.
Right, the experts.
This may be possible. I hope that if this is discovered, the facts about it are put out. And don't think it will stop necessarily, even if Biden is pushed out.
Right, that's a
Respect their
distinguished
views.
former
Member of Congress,
congresswoman.
I would hope,
Right,
would
Jane
have
Harmon.
independent views. That's what.
Stop. Right. Is it disinformation that Obama led a senile Joe Biden off stage? You can see Biden like getting taken by the hand by Barack Obama to help him off stage as Joe Biden freezes up. Joe
has
Biden,
been portrayed by his political opponents and even some of his allies as too old to be president. I'm not asking for your political opinion here, but how does he seem to you?
Look, I'm not going to comment. I didn't comment on the former president's mental health, physical health, and I'm not going to comment on the current president's mental health.
Wait, you did comment on Donald Trump's mental health. That's insane.
Physical health. I think that's highly inappropriate for the senior officer of the United States military to do that. I would just tell you that I meet frequently with the president, and every single time I meet with him, he is just fine. how people interpret that is up to them, but
it's just fine.
I engage with him frequently and alert, sound, does his homework, reads the papers, reads all the read-ahead material, and is very, very engaging in issues of very serious matters of war and peace and life and death. So if the American people are worried about an individual who is someone who's making decisions of war and peace and has access to, makes the decisions of nuclear weapons and that sort of thing, I think they can rest easy.
So every single expert opinion I could find on Google Scholar regarding Joe Biden's cognitive abilities said we got nothing to worry about. Essentially, that Joe Biden is as sharp as a tack. Morning, Joe.
If you can't handle the truth, start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. Yeah, this version of Biden is the best Biden ever.
She knows so long as she was 9.
In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been.
President Biden has a photographic memory. His understanding and mastery of a complicated geopolitical situation, remarkable.
He is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
I was sitting, 2 feet from him across the table, and he was, intense.
Have trouble walking sometimes? Yeah, so did FDR. He wanted GD war.
But he's totally focused. He's very sharp.
They say he's sharp in meetings and so on.
Very lucid, very well informed. Biden is stately, and he comes with gravitas. There hasn't been, as far as I know, a single claim that Biden made a mistake.
Ageism is an issue. Americans have a rich history of holding people's physical characteristics against them. Okay, you can ask African Americans.
He's older. That doesn't mean that he is...
Okay, physical characteristics. So if you're infirm, right, that's not just a physical characteristic. That's also going to affect your thinking. Your brain operates in your body. What's going on in your body affects your mind. I mean, just this shameless lying by the news media and our experts.
Unfit, and there's a lot of ageism there.
Now, this age attack, this obsession by the right.
So if you don't accept that there's any such moral category as ageism, you're going to see these things a lot more clearly.
Joe Biden may not be able to speak for himself the way that he used to.
They want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, and that's him lying around.
I think people should be speaking up for Joe Biden.
Americans and reporters in the media are just judging him by a physical appearance, and it's horribly unfair. Age is an asset.
I can't imagine going through life without judging on people's physical appearance. You would be so handicapped, right? You would be so retarded going through life without making some judgments on people's physical characteristics.
Showed exactly how with it he is.
The flip side of this coin is that he has a tremendous amount of wisdom and experience. Have you heard any concerns from anyone who has met with President Biden about him seeming a little slower?
No.
More wild speculation from a bunch of people who have probably never been in a room with Joe Biden and certainly don't have medical degrees that I'm aware of.
You don't get...
Right. You have to have a medical degree to recognize that Joe Biden is senile. Right. This is the left-wing reliance on experts over common sense.
Paid for performance to be president. The job is not a job of endurance. I don't see Donald Trump out bike riding like Joe Biden.
It's the Hillary's email. All they have is that he's old.
He can clear a dementia bar, and that's probably a win.
The media are not fair, and they're getting less and less fair, and things are frightening. You have Wall Street Journal running a horribly sourced piece saying that Biden is unfit.
Dubious Wall Street Journal report about the president's acuity.
Shoddy story by the Wall Street Journal questioning Biden's mental fitness.
Wall Street Journal story had a lot of flaws, as you said. But Sinclair, they didn't do any original reporting. They didn't follow up. They didn't do any work.
The hero of the day is Hirsch Goldberg Poland, and still... He is not here with us, but he's still being held by Hamas.
But a huge part of the Mueller report talks about Russian disinformation tactics. And one of the themes this election cycle is that Joe Biden is too old to lead. And so everyone is seizing upon this. And it is a classic disinformation tactic. And I think the best thing that we can do is to...
Yeah, just disinformation, man. Right? all these calls for expertise, guys, you gotta wait for the experts to weigh in and tell you what your lying eyes are deceiving you about.
Grown from a murmur among allies who said they believed or hoped they were catching the president on a bad day, to a deafening roar as many of those same allies called on him to step aside in the wake of his disastrous June 27th debate performance. On Sunday, Biden announced he was withdrawing from the presidential race, an unparalleled step that leaves Democrats without a nominee less than 4 months before Election Day. Biden endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place, but it remains to be seen if voters rally behind her. How the Democratic Party came to the brink of nominating a candidate with an obvious flaw is a story of allies eager to look the other way.
So what should we expect from the news? Because if you want the score of last night's baseball game, you're going to find that accurately in the news. If you want to find out how the Dow Jones ended today, all right, you're going to find that in the news. So there are plenty of ways where the news is accurate. I remember Richard Hanania back in January of 2023, when I was still in Australia, he published a provocative essay, Why the Media is Honest and Good. And to me, that's like arguing that politicians or corporations or clergy or South Africans or Australians or Jews are honest and good, right? Some are, some aren't. Some are in certain situations and not in other situations, right? A wiser question is to ask, where is the media honest and good? Because nobody is honest and good, period. Right? Morality and truth-telling and competence are domain-specific. So news is a great definition by a scholar of the news media. The passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures. So the news media didn't want to state that Donald Trump was the subject of an assassination attempt until you had the passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures. In other words, until a law enforcement agency had conducted some investigation and come out and said that there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Right? Until someone has come out who's an expert, all right, a bureaucracy, some bureaucratic procedure, only then can we accept that something has truly happened.
Smashed and grabbed 14 million votes from Biden and then just redistributed them to Harris. She didn't earn this. She inherited it. And Americans aren't hot on heirs. They like self-made men and women. They're brainwashing us. We know they're brainwashing us, but they don't think we know. The Wall Street Journal out with a massive report today that Washington insiders and foreign diplomats have known Biden was comatose for years and worked around the clock to hide it from you. Biden hasn't met with House Democrats about legislation for 3 years. He hasn't held a cabinet meeting in almost a year. Foreign dignitaries say Biden had to bail out in the middle of meetings. Donors saying he'd tell the same story 2 times. If you tried to speak out, you were threatened and blackballed. The strategy was ignore the problem, nothing to see here, and run out the clock. Joe Biden wasn't even a part of the Biden administration. He was just a prop while his lieutenants ran the executive branch. He didn't even know his Secret Service director was a woman. It's the biggest cover-up in American history. They rigged the primary, then detonated Joe at the debate and played shocked that he was shot. Putin knew he was shot. He met with Biden one-on-one in 21, sized him up. A few months later, he invades Ukraine. He took advantage of him. So did the mega donors and the media. And when they turned on him, it was over. Biden doesn't have a base. There's no Biden movement. People chanting his name, Joe, don't go. It was man versus machine. And the machine made Joe fire himself. He was the only person he'd ever fired. They're saying if Joe's not fit enough to run for president, then he can't be president. So we have to 25th Amendment him out of there and make Kamala president? She's even more radical and incompetent than he is. You're going to give her Air Force.
Okay. Back to what exactly is the news? What should we expect from the news? What should you expect from yourself? All right. You are going to behave differently. You are going to give more or less truth depending on circumstance. So what should you expect from a talk show host, whether it's a sports talk show or a news talk show? All right, people are paid to optimize for interesting, right? Not for truth. Interesting for 100 IQ audience. There's no money in being right. All the money is in being interesting. So think of news as the passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures, right? The O.J. Simpson criminal trial resulted in a not guilty verdict. That was a passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures. The verdict had nothing to do with the truth and the morality of Simpson's murders. What the news media has primarily told us, all right, about Joe Biden's cognitive health for the past 5 years is not exactly the truth. Right, look at New York Times front page stories, right? They almost all proceed from bureaucracies. During the summer of 2020, the news media pushed the false narrative that police were systemically racist against blacks. Now, all individuals, all institutions push narratives that deserve critical analysis, right? You need to place the narrative in a particular time and place, understand the incentives for the people push it. Most people, most of the time, don't say what they mean. They don't mean what they say. The better the journalist, the better the commentator, the more effectively they put things in context. And so the context was, in the summer of 2020, that about 10 unarmed black men a year are killed by police, and that black men are less likely to be killed, unarmed black men are less likely to be killed by police than men of other races, right? So what you get in the news is information that primarily comes from bureaucracies. Bureaucracies are primarily dominated by the left, right? They're operated by people who use careful, critical discourse, right? As soon as you say the word senile, you are showing yourself to be a bad person. You are operating outside of careful, critical discourse. It's a pejorative term. It's a bad word. It marks you as a bad person, but there's no other word that so effectively describes Joe Biden's state, right? Talking about cognitive decline, that's not a natural way of speaking. Talking about disinformation, not a natural way of speaking. This is an elite way of speaking. So sometimes this information from bureaucracies filtered through journalists is going to be more important and more accurate than what you can learn informally on your own with your own eyes and ears. And sometimes it won't, right? The better you know a topic, the more you're going to realize how inadequate the news is. Right? The news is akin to the employee handbook you get when you start a job. Right? If you rely 100% on this handbook to guide your actions in the workplace, right, you'll be less effective than if you primarily rely on what you see and hear. On the other hand, to completely ignore the employee handbook is not usually going to serve you either. So with news, if you primarily rely on the news for your understanding of the world, you will be much less effective in navigating life than if you primarily rely on your own firsthand experience, right? A handful of stereotypes about group differences will be more helpful to you in discerning reality than all the news and academic articles claiming to smash stereotypes. So Richard Hanania published a provocative essay, Why the Media is Honest and Good. And his subhead is How to Critique the Press Without Devolving into Nihilism. Right? How many people really think that critiquing the press leads to nihilism? I don't think that's a problem. Richard says, I tend to get annoyed by people around me. Yeah, you're a loner. Spend any time among conservatives and you'll before long realize that few things get them riled up as a chance to attack the media. Well, for good reason. Right? In the West today, almost all institutions are controlled by the left. Right? That leaves people on the right riled up. And Hanania says the media is good and honest. You should be glad it exists. You should admire those who work in the industry. You should hope for its continued influence and success. The media rarely tells explicit lies. While the American media has serious flaws, it's one of the most honest, decent, and fair institutions designed for producing and spreading truth in human history. While the news media is not primarily about spreading truth nor producing truth, right? It is designed for producing and spreading the reports of bureaucracies, right? The passage of bureaucratically recognized events through administrative procedures, right? That is not the same as truth, right? If Richard Hanania was right, then the lives of people who do not follow the news would be significantly diminished. That's not my impression, right? Many of the smartest people I know pay very little attention to the news. Back to this epic Wall Street Journal article out today.
Biden advisors who worked to stamp out doubts about his vigor and a party apparatus that boxed out alternative candidates. The result is an epic, years-long miscalculation that has Democrats racing to mount an uncertain reboot of their campaign against former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee who is fresh off a unifying party convention that was galvanized by an unsuccessful attempt to assassinate him on July 13th. The drawbacks of Biden's age were clear to voters, with polls showing that nearly 3/4 of them last year deemed him too old to seek another term. Yet inside the party's uppermost ranks, revelations about the toll aging has taken on the president seem to catch many people by surprise in recent months. I am really concerned about what we were not told during these months, said Representative Lloyd Doggett, D. Texas, in an interview. I remain concerned about that for whatever reasons, this overprotective, stage-managed kind of operation not...
So this doesn't just occur with regard to Joe Biden, right? This overprotective, stage-managed presentation of the truth, that is what you will get in news and in elite discourse. Whoa, do we have Ricardo in the chat? That's awesome. Right, but what this bloke's talking here about the news media coverage of Joe Biden, that's the same as what we get in general.
Only appears to have denied the American people broadly of an understanding of the president's current situation, but also other elected officials. White House spokesman Andrew Bates said on Sunday, President Biden has given over 50 interviews this year alone, recently held a 1-hour, thorough press conference, done over 580 gaggles with the White House press corps in office.
Okay, so what's behind this stilted discourse that we get in the news? Like, why is the news so different from reality? Why is elite discourse often so different from reality? And you learn a particular way of speaking that you can call careful critical discourse, CCD, that dominates those who graduate from elite universities. And one of the markers of careful discourse is that you do not mention bad words like senile. But there's no equivalent to senile, right? It's a perfect word to use for Joe Biden's condition. So when you don't use it, you get such careful, considered, critical discourse that it's removed from reality. Right? There are many advantages to careful critical discourse, right? You get circumspection, you get care, you get self-discipline, you get seriousness, but you also get an unhealthy self-consciousness, you get stilted, convoluted speech, you get an inhibition of play, you lack the visceral truth that you often find on many live streams and on talk radio and in comedy, right? You have an inhibition of play, imagination, and passion, and you get this stifling pressure for conformity, for expressive discipline, so that all the news narratives seem to blend together and sound the same. And so you have increasing alienation from reality, right? You have a loss of warmth and spontaneity. You get so much propriety, right? You get so much courtesy that you get a structured inflexibility and it just... an insistence on hewing to required rules of what counts for proper speech that may air online, on TV news shows, on the radio, right? A culture of critical, careful discourse, and it stifles the ability to tell the truth. And it was shown most dramatically with regard to Joe Biden, but you see it all the time with regard to group differences in life, right? All sorts of different groups have different strengths and they succeed differently in different areas in life. And it's something that most people see with their eyes. But the notion that different people have different gifts, right, that is outside of this culture of critical discourse.
And travels the country speaking directly to the American people about his agenda for making their lives better. He said Biden has built the most successful record in modern American history, and that the president has always said that it is fair for reporters to ask about his age. Ron Klain, who attended the October 2021 meeting and was Biden's chief of staff at the time, said the decision not to call for a vote at the time was a brilliant move by Biden that avoided strong-arming reluctant members of the Democratic caucus and
Right. They were pushing a lie. I mean, this man has shown obvious signs of senility since back in 2018. And there is a price to be paid for this culture of careful, critical discourse that does not allow, honesty. That courtesy is a wonderful thing, but it always comes at the price of telling the truth. And there are times when it's more important in life to be courteous, but there are also many times where it's more important to tell the truth. And Megan McArdle wrote in the Washington Post, there's a broad journalistic norm against picking on physical characteristics. And that's all courteous, but it inhibits telling the truth. Physiognomy is destiny is probably a bit of an overstatement, but you can certainly learn a great deal about someone by their physiognomy, right? The brain operates within a body. If the body is frail, right, that's going to have a profound effect on the brain. Joe Biden's frail, weak, timid way of walking through life was also expressed in his senility, right? The brain operates within the body, right? We all naturally take note of physical characteristics. The safer we feel with someone, the more likely we are to confide in them about physical characteristics. The more spontaneous we are, the more likely we are to note physical characteristics, right? If you go to a good comedy show, you'll get a lot of comedy about physical characteristics, right? The less of a filter we have, right, the more likely we are to note physical characteristics. We are physical beings. It is absurd. It is unreal. It is artificial to not comment on physical characteristics. Now, there's a time and a place, right? Physiognomy is destiny is probably a bit of a overstatement, but you're rarely going to read a good novel, right, that does not contain physical characteristics. Novels are often enjoyed because they allow deeper access to what really motivates people compared to the far more sanitized version of reality that you get in the news, right? Much of what motivates us and drives us and inspires us and infuriates us is viscerally too repellent to be honestly described in the news. And often spontaneous cutting remarks about our physical characteristics have the capacity to change our lives for the good, right? One acquaintance of mine, Greg Kreitzer, a writer, he was getting out of his car and a stranger driving by yelled, "Get out of the way, fatso." That inspired Greg Kreitzer to research fat, to lose weight, and to write a best-selling book called Fatland, How Americans Became the Fattest People in the World. So you'll also see with Donald Trump, he's not a big fan of expertise, and you'll be shocked to learn that he's not a big fan of the culture of critical, careful discourse. Right? This is Elliot Cohen, never Trump Republican.
Chaos. I think one of the things is that we realize with Trump is he finds it very hard to deal with the expert and technocratic.
Right. In other words, Trump can't stand stilted conversation from elites that expresses things in the way that Harvard University would approve, right? A culture of careful, critical discourse that said it was socially unacceptable to note that the president of the United States was senile, right? Donald Trump does not go for that kind of rhetoric. He finds it false.
Class, and John Bolton is sort of at the margins of that, but that's basically what he's part of. He finds it easier to deal with the political people who happen to have, technical expertise, which would be the Tom Cottons and the Pompeos. I think he does view alliances as...
So what makes an expert? Someone who other experts say is an expert, right? How do you progress in your education through a BA, a master's, and a PhD? Much of it is an education in education, learning how to play the game. And Donald Trump is less willing to play the game than any American president in my memory, right? Part of the game of expertise is forming alliances and forming clubs and groups and patting each other on the back and saying, oh, this person's an expert because he studied under me, he got a PhD, like he jumped through these bureaucratically recognized hurdles, now he's an expert.
It's kind of a protection racket. But I also think he likes to talk big as a way of gaining leverage. That's been part of his MO. Would he really want to blow it up if he thought,
talking about NATO,
or people were told him, this will destroy your legacy? No, I mean he's going to be obsessed with what his legacy. Possibly Australia, they say, okay, we got to get nuclear weapons. And
so talking about the decline of NATO,
for that asset to fall into Chinese hands,
talking about Taiwan now, right? Saying it will lead to nuclear expansion
is a big deal. It's also a big deal if they have that island, not only with its resources of people and high technology, but just its physical position and the danger that it then poses for Japan and other countries. Furthermore, if after everything we have done and said about Taiwan, we let it slip into the hands of China, then there again, I think either the local Asian powers simply make their peace with China and accommodate it as the hegemon, or equally likely, I think in the case of Japan and possibly Australia, they say, okay, we got to get nuclear weapons. And I think that's not a world that we want. I mean, we are just not used to the idea that you could have a cascade of nuclear proliferation and what that might mean. And I just think people they don't take it seriously enough, and they don't pause to consider what are the implications. But I mean, let me just finish with this. If you give up on Taiwan after, and certainly if the administration were to give up on Ukraine as well, I mean, So
Barack Obama graduated from Harvard Law School, and he talks like a member of the elite. He talks how academics speak. Donald Trump does not.
Word will be mud. And what people don't understand is that so much of our power in the world and our ability to set the rules and our ability to create a world order that benefits us, which isn't something that Trump always understands, is because of our alliance systems. And to jeopardize those is to do tremendous damage to the United States as well as the rest.
Yeah, but I remember when Russell Roberts was commenting on the case for free trade, the free market economist, and he said that he believes in free trade because it's good for the Chinese as well as for Americans. The welfare of the Chinese was just as important to him as the welfare of Americans. So many of our alliances, you can make a very strong case that they are no longer in America's best interests. They may well be in Poland's best interests or South Korea's best interests, but why would the United States not want to operate primarily on the basis of what is in America's best interest? So you see with Donald Trump, many of the characteristics of the more visceral personality, the opposite personality from those who populate the culture of careful critical discourse. And philosopher Ronnie Goodman writes about it in his great book, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. And he notes that the medievals were distinguished not by their amorality or egoism, but by a fundamentally different mental and emotional landscape. And you could say the same thing about Donald Trump and other people who are on the right. Right? The medievals lived in a society where individuals gave way to their impulses. Right? Donald Trump, classic medieval, often gives way to his impulses. Right? And drive with an ease, spontaneity, and openness that is foreign to us today. So if you often give way to your impulses and drives with an ease, spontaneity, and openness that is foreign to us today, right, you are more medieval in your outlook than modern. You are not part of the elite culture of careful critical discourse. So conservatives have more of the medieval in them than people on the left, right? The medievals had emotional lives that were comparatively unregulated. Donald Trump has an emotional life that is unregulated, liable to oscillate violently and unpredictably between extremes, right? People who lead more visceral lives than those engaged in the culture of careful critical discourse, right? They are much more medieval than modern, right? One moment they're joking, then they start mocking each other. One word leads to another. Suddenly, from the midst of laughter, they find themselves in the fiercest feud. So much that appears contradictory to us about medievals, but also you could say about Donald Trump, right? The intensity of their piety, well, that wouldn't fit Trump. The violence of their fear of hell, their guilt feelings, their penitence, their immense outbursts of joy, the sudden flaring and uncontrollable forces of their hatred and belligerence, the rapid changes in mood. These are all symptoms of the same social and personality structure. This is what happens when you're porous, right? The Buffett identity is that you can decide reason, meaning, purpose, morality. All right, you can make all the important decisions from within your own Buffett identity, within your own brain, that your rationality and cognitive powers are capable of sorting all these things out. A traditional perspective on life is that meaning, purpose, morality, good and evil, all that is sacred exists outside of you, and it is your responsibility to live up to it. So the liberal left approach to life is follow your bliss, right? Follow what your head and your heart say. The traditional approach to life is to do your duty. So why are moderns more subdued, more moderate, more calculated, right? Why do we have more self-restraint? Because we have inherited much more of this modern notion of the buffered identity where we can decide things on our own, as opposed to the traditional notion of a porous identity where what's going on all around me is going to have a profound effect on me. So we had this decisive development in the Western civilizing process from warriors into courtiers, right? The knight who's king of his own castle, but thanks to changes in politics and economics by the 17th century, if he wants to maintain his esteemed position in society, he has to go to court. So when you live at court, that requires a set of thoroughgoing psychological changes that eventually spread beyond court and affect the entire identity of the modern West, right? And they are changes that create what we now understand as civilized. So we have the independent, self-sufficient feudal lords of old, right, like the medievals, who used to enjoy a free and unfettered play in all the terrors and joys of life. And Donald Trump's very much like the self-sufficient feudal lord of old, right? When you're a feudal lord, you're only slightly subject to the continuous division and regulation imposed by dependence on others, right? But once you become heavily dependent on others, such as our elites in the media, you have to develop a strict and stable superego, a conscience through which compulsions stemming from others or your own internal drives are restrained. So if you move from your own castle to the court, right, your value now is not in your wealth, it's not in your achievements, it's not in the abilities that you might possess. Your value rests in the favor that you enjoy with the king, the influence that you have with other powerful people, and your part in the play of courtly cliques. And this is true today, right? What is the ultimate source of power? It is your social position, right? So the modern is no longer a free man. He's no longer the master of his own castle, right? He now lives at court. He serves the prince. He waits on him at table. At court, he lives surrounded by people. He must behave towards each of them in exact accordance with their rank and his own rank. He must learn to continually adjust his language, his gestures, right, to the different ranks and standing of the people at court, to measure his language exactly and to control his eyes exactly. This is wokeism. There are certain groups that are off limits to public criticism. And so you move to court, you develop this new self-discipline. You move to university. If you're going to succeed at university, you must master this new self-discipline. You must develop incomparably stronger reserve than those who can live independently. So power, as we move through the 17th, 18th, 19th century into the 21st century, power becomes less and less a matter of brute physical force and more something that is exercised through words and through surveillance. So individuals are more socially vulnerable than ever before. The more socially vulnerable you feel, the more vulnerable you feel, the more careful you're going to be with your words and actions, right? And when you have this radical heightening of the day-to-day coercion that people can exert on each other, right? The demands for good behavior are raised more emphatically, and you learn to take on the culture of careful critical discourse. You have to moderate your spontaneous emotions. You have to extend your mental space beyond the past and the future into what's going on with the people around you, right? You have to try to connect events to cause and effect, right? You have to develop a strict, continuous, uniform mode of controlling your impulses, a discipline that was once exclusive to monks and courtiers. So modernity is the democratization of courtly civility and the secularization of monkish self-discipline. So we have behavioral norms originally used to tame an unruly military aristocracy through court service and estate management, but then deployed over the centuries to tame the general population. And religion becomes conscripted, so evangelical Christianity in particular becomes conscripted to serve the new industrial capitalism by disciplining its adherents. And you get increasing theological justification for ever increasing amounts of self-discipline with words and actions. You get active state intervention, trying to create a rationalized, disciplined, professionalized mode of life into the population. You get more and more of these ordering impulses, trying to create a stable society, a hygienic society, a safe society, by training people to restrain their drives. So the independent knight of old, he felt no need to banish coarseness and vulgarity from his life. But when you live at court, and we all now live at court, or most of us do, right? We are now part of a stock exchange, which our value is being continually assessed and reassessed. And so you can't afford the old freedoms of old, right? Gone are the days in which one could leap from the most exuberant pleasure to the deepest despondency on the basis of slight impressions, right? What matters now are others' impressions, not one's own. The foremost task becomes impression management, all right? The more prestigious your position, the more disciplined you have to be with impression management, self-management, the development of a new self-consciousness. Right, political standing was formerly decided by the sword. It's now based on continuous reflection, foresight, and calculation, self-control, precise and articulate regulation of one's own emotions and words, knowledge of the whole terrain, human and non-human, in which one acts. Right, these become more and more the indispensable preconditions of social success. So you just can't come out and say radical things such as, oh, women have no role in the Secret Service, right? You say something like that, and you will be considered socially unacceptable. And I talked about this with Stephen J. James yesterday.
I spoke to you before, in the immediate aftermath of the Trump assassination attempt, because what I wanted to say that I was watching it, like my instinct, right? My instinct was to lie and say that I had been watching it live.
Mm-hmm.
I had to stop myself from doing it. I wanted to be part of it. It made me think about it, where like conspiracy theories develop from, and I imagine lots of it is like from false witness accounts of people who are just wanting to be part of the moment, like get carried away in the excitement of something in a weird, like narcissistic way, wanting to share in it. Because from what I understand, there's lots of people, like, for instance, who, when 9/11 happened, claimed to have seen the first plane hit the tower, either on TV or in real life. And then, like, it comes out after the fact, well, nobody saw the first plane hitting the tower on the TV. So all these witnesses.
Okay, that's the wrong link. Doggone it. I'm gonna find the right link when Stephen J. James first joined the show yesterday. Here we go.
The guy speaking there, one of the points I wanted to make when I came on is I'm very frustrated by this line that people are taking, which is, I'm not saying that women can't do the job, okay? Because I think that this just feeds the problem even more, okay? Yes, you can have some ladies doing like regular Secret Service jobs, but not the close protection team. I just don't buy it, okay? I just don't. No, there's no, for instance, boxing regulator in the world who would sanction a fight between a man and a woman of the same weight. So who are we kidding when this close protection, like whatever it is, a 6-man team who walks with Trump wherever he goes, who are responsible for him on the podium, who are responsible for him as he's walking amongst crowds. This team who has to disarm people, in most circumstances, it's probably going to be physical disarmament, grabbing them by the throat or something like this, grabbing them by the arms, taking them to the ground. This should be big, strong men, without a doubt. So
Yes, without a doubt. But the reason that we are so free to state this obvious truth is that we have nothing to lose. All right, we're not gonna give up prestigious positions. We're not gonna give up wealth and honor. So for Stephen J. James and myself, all right, our stock on the stock exchange of life, as far as social status, is quite low. That frees us up to speak the truth, all right, to say risky things. We don't have to inhibit and modulate as much. We don't feel as much pressure to be part of the culture of careful critical discourse. You're not going to give up, beautiful, sexual relationships by stating the obvious truth. Everyone that I was playing who was much more convoluted in their approach, they had more to lose than we did. So one of the virtues of our lack of success in life is that we can be free to say the blunt truth.
Yes, I get the point. It just really frustrates me as I hear them sat there attempting to give this this truth about the fact that it has to be somebody competent, and but yet they're still walking.
Right. So the higher you're standing in the stock exchange of life, the more careful and calculating you have to be with your choices, with your behavior, with your words. That means the less sincere and less authentic. Right. The longer, the deeper, more intricate your chains of social interdependency become, all right, the stronger you need to impose self-discipline. So modernity is the democratization of courtly civility and the secularization of monkish asceticism. And to be on the right means to be more medieval, more spontaneous, and less in the careful culture of critical discourse than people on the left. Right? Right-wing instinctual spontaneity allowed conservatives to more quickly note that Joe Biden appeared senile, while more civilized, disciplined people who had a very high standing in the stock market of life, they would hold back on those comments for fear of sounding ageist and ableist. Now, as a trad, I don't believe there are any such moral categories as ageist and ableist, but I am not a courtier. Right? I'm not high in the stock exchange of life, and so I am able to dismiss vast swaths of the modern morality. Now, how many courtiers would have felt comfortable stating publicly that the king is senile? Not many. Right? If there were 2, 3, 4 competitors for the throne, how many courtiers would have felt comfortable publicly stating that the competitor favored by 95% of your other courtiers is senile? Not many. On the other hand, a Lord of the Manor would have felt more comfortable saying publicly what he believed to be true. Once he was forced to live at court to retain his status, his willingness to state unpopular truths would go down. So courtier morality discourages saying unpopular truths. The more that power is exercised through words and surveillance, right, the more you get this radical heightening of the level of day-to-day coercion that people exert on one another, meaning the higher your status, right, the more vulnerable you are to this coercion, right, the more people will take care with what they say, the more vulnerable members of the press feel, right, the more they will take care not to say risky things. There's a great psychiatrist who came up with attachment theory, John Bowlby from Great Britain, and he published an essay in 1988, A Secure Base. He wrote that life is best organized as a series of daring ventures from a secure base. But if you're operating in a social stock market where you have social status that can go up and down depending on how carefully you adhere to the rules, right, you're not going to feel terribly secure, right? The less secure your base, the less likely you are to say anything daring, risky, or spontaneous. Journalism is more financially insecure now than at any time in the past century. And Charles Murray noted, July 10, the press is staffed now by members of the cognitive elite. Journalism used to be a working class profession. Now, if you look at the stars of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, right, the big magazines, the people who run the TV networks, they come out of the same elite schools as the ruling class. Right? They are full participants in a semi-conspiracy to cover up Joe Biden's senility. If you follow what's happened in the United States after Joe Biden's debate appearance, you have observed the exposure of the extent to which journalists covered up what they knew to be true of Joe Biden's mental frailty. Only now, after the debate exposed it, are they rushing to expose it. None of them are willing to say we covered it up. And the same thing happens with intelligence, genetics, racial difference, group differences. They will not report the truth. Social pressure to be part of your in-group is extremely strong. Complaints about fake news are all true. So, Scott Ritter, complicated guy. He was right that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. So on a very important point, he was right and almost all the elites were wrong. He thinks that the deep state was in on the Trump
election
assassination.
Of duty, failure to be trained. That's on one side. Or was this
first speaking is Larry Johnson,
part of a deliberate plan to try to have Donald Trump killed? I know that mentioned a Secret Service buddy I'll be interviewing here in about an hour and a half. When he was interviewed on Sunday, his initial remarks were, well, we shouldn't jump to conclusions and recognize this probably just was a failure of leadership and some poor training. when I talked to him Thursday night, he was going, "Man, this stinks. This stinks." Now, because there are too many things that happened that could be a coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidence. So, number one, for example,
right. So, if you're a part of the culture of careful critical discourse, you don't come out and say the deep state tried to kill Donald Trump because there's no direct evidence for that. What we have are an accumulation of mind-numbing, bewildering, grotesque errors by the Secret Service that the mind just recoils at simply labeling them as incompetence, right? The mind naturally viscerally inclines towards suspecting there's some kind of conspiracy here to murder Donald Trump. But once you follow that natural visceral impulse, you have left the culture of careful critical discourse, and you are a bad person, and you will not be able to maintain any kind of standing in the elite, and your social stock will go down.
The regular Secret Service detail assigned to Donald Trump was pulled off. And it was pulled off because they said, "Hey, you guys are tired, take a vacation." Excuse me. They then brought in this agent from Pittsburgh who's not very experienced. And they brought in other personnel. And they may have brought in Homeland Security folks. I don't doubt that if whistleblowers are telling Holly that, I would believe them. But part of the advance work that a Secret Service team assigned to an event like this is supposed to do is do a 360-degree sweep of the perimeter, going out about 1,000 yards. They did not do the sweep of that particular set of buildings that were off to Donald Trump's right where the shot was taken from. They didn't do it. They assigned that to the local police. "Oh, you guys take care of it." Well, that's problem number one. Problem number two is we're now learning that there was a lot of information that there is a possible suspect out there in the crowd. And once you have a problem, protocol for Secret Service is pull the protectee off. Don't let him get out there in public.
Right. So if you say this was a conspiracy by the deep state, you cannot be part of the elite. Charles Murray is quoted in Ronnie Goldman's book. The culture of the new upper class carries with it an unmistakable whiff of "we're better than the rabble" mentality. The daily yoga and jogging that keep them whipper thin, not just healthy things for them to do. People are overweight, are less admirable as people. Deciding not to recycle does not reflect just an alternative opinion about whether recycling makes sense. It is inherently irresponsible. Smokers are not to be worried about, but to be held in contempt. Right? If you chug a cheap domestic beer at a NASCAR track or a monster truck competition, right? This is an example of the unself-conscious coarseness of the medieval, who has not yet been disciplined into the peculiar courtly rationality. Instead, they just live in a world defined by squalor, danger, and physicality. Right? They're not part of the more refined pleasures, sipping white wine or drinking a latte at an art gallery. They're not fit to be at court. By watching this show, you're probably a person who's not fit to be at court.
And until you get the problem solved. Problem number three, no integrated communications. So you've got federal, state, and local police, and they should all be up on one channel where they can all call up and communicate, and you make sure the information is cycled back into the Tactical Operations Center, also known as the TOC. That didn't happen. Then how do you know who's friend and who's foe? Well, even in the war in Ukraine, we watch the Ukrainians are wearing blue armbands. They tie a blue ribbon around one of their arms, and the Russians tie a white ribbon around their arms. Why? So you make sure you don't shoot your buddies. Well, how do you know out in that environment that you're not, one of the questions that was raised, the possibility they were confused on whether this kid was a part of the local police. They failed to have a color of the day so that they could readily identify. I mean, it goes on and on and on. What the good news was, though, they did assign a second counter sniper team to the event. And that second counter sniper team, who really hasn't been photographed. We've got the photograph of the guys who, if you're looking at Donald Trump, they're up on the roof to the left, guy with the tripod. Turns out their field of vision was obscured by a tree. So they didn't have a direct field of vision. And then when the gunfire shots, they're ducking down and going for cover.
So if you suspect there was a deep state conspiracy to take out Donald Trump, you have to slum it. No respectable expert, no member of the culture of careful critical discourse will say things like you're hearing now.
Which is like, dude, that's not your job's to stay on the rifle and keep shooting. But the other
unfortunately, once you leave the culture of careful critical discourse, you get a lot of loons. And so I don't believe in one conspiracy theory. All right, none of the major conspiracy theories I don't believe in. The level of incompetence shown by the U.S. Secret Service in this case is my one exception. This is the one time where I'll admit right now I'm thinking that the incompetence wasn't just incompetence, but that there was some maliciousness involved on the part of Department of Homeland Security or the Secret Service to facilitate the murder of Donald Trump. That's where my head is going, and I'm not someone who buys into any other major conspiracy theory. On the other hand, almost every conspiracy theory I have seen or read or articulated about the Donald Trump shooting does not make sense to me. What I'm hearing right here by Larry Johnson, this makes sense to me, but all the noise about second and third shooters because they listened to the audio or they had some expert or their own experts say, oh, the audio shows that there were multiple shooters on Donald Trump. I think that's nonsense. So almost all the other conspiracy theories about the Trump assassination I regard as nonsense. What I'm hearing here from Larry Johnson and then from Scott Ritter, and I'm not thrilled to be throwing in with Scott Ritter, but this I find compelling.
Counter sniper team who was to Donald Trump's left, and as you're looking at the stage, our right, they were up on that roof. They did have a direct line of sight. They did take the shot. They did kill it. So, yeah. So what is all
right? Do I want to be lumped in with Mike Cernovich, Candace Owens, Alex Jones? Like, God, no. I want absolutely nothing to do with them. Unfortunately, when you start speculating that the deep state tried to murder Donald Trump, that's the company you're in, and it's icky.
All this mean? The failures were at the management level, and so the question has to be asked: what was the management trying to get Donald Trump killed, or were they just absolutely incompetent?
Scott, was it ordered?
Go for it, buddy.
I mean, I've been around the block a couple times. I've never worked with the Secret Service, so I can't claim to have intimate knowledge of Secret Service protocols. I've been on the periphery of Secret Service operations, and I will tell you that every time that happens.
So all sorts of former members of the Secret Service who are speaking out about this assassination argue, unless you spent time in the Secret Service, you can't comment. And that's bogus, right? Every profession wants to limit the power of people outside the profession to critique it. But I am open to powerful critiques from outside the Secret Service.
And the Secret Service was large and in charge. It just wasn't any oops. I mean, it didn't matter if I was a Marine Corps officer, if I was the United Nations Chief Weapons Inspector at the United Nations. I mean, I watched 7 consecutive General Assembly workups by the Secret Service, and we were briefed on what we could do and what we couldn't do. And let's be very clear, you couldn't even get close to doing what you couldn't do because you were blocked, you were prevented. The perimeters were airtight. And then I've been involved in other things too, where just the professionalism of the people involved. I have a lot of respect for the Secret Service in terms of their training, their selection process. There's zero tolerance for error. It's one of those, especially when you get into presidential security, it's one of those organizations where if you show up at work with a scuffed shoe, that's considered to be, I'm being sort of over dramatic here, but that's like inattention to detail. You fail. You're done. We don't want you. You don't get away with making minor errors because minor errors become medium errors, become major errors, and you have a dead president. So there's no tolerance for any of this. And suddenly we have an operation. And let me just throw another thing out there. We can talk about this later, maybe. But and the Iranians want to kill Donald Trump.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just saying right now, which tells you that the Iranian intelligence is 100% bull crap. It's just made up, politicized crap thrown out there as a distraction. Because if the Iranians were seriously trying to kill Donald Trump, this outdoor event would have been locked and blocked, and they would have had double security, triple security. Go ahead, Anya.
So who came up with this, that Iran is behind it, which is, can I just say, in my opinion, not being an expert, one of the biggest BS.
Donald Trump at this point in time. Yeah. That's just not the direction they're going. They may be, there's politicians that are angry and all this stuff, but the Iranian government is not trying to kill Donald Trump or any senior American official that high up. Look, if a regional general offers himself up as a soft target, they can take the shot, they'll kill him because they want revenge. They are not targeted. So you have people sitting there and somebody said, we need a distraction. And they went, bam, publish this crap, and out it went. Let's get back to the other thing. But the only reason I bring that up is that it was real. You don't have this clown show. What happened, I believe, have you ever seen that movie, The Road to Perdition? Tom Hanks movie? He's a mafia assassin, and he gets tangled up with Paul Newman, who's a mafia guy, and the son of Paul Newman's a bad guy, and Tom Hanks wants to kill him, active revenge, but he can't because he's protected. But finally, after he causes enough harm, the deal is made that if you return the money or you stop robbing the banks, you get to kill the son. And he shows up at the hotel where, had he tried to show up previous, he'd have been killed. Had he tried to arrive in Chicago previously, he'd have been killed.
So here's my life experience as a reporter. A lot of people are insane in some areas of life, and Scott Ritter has certainly been insane in some areas of life, and incredibly wise and prescient in other areas of life. So it's not unusual to look for wisdom in one area of life from a bloke who is totally nuts in other areas of life, right? As a reporter, as a commentator, I'd rather not play Scott Ritter. I'd rather have nothing to do with the Scott Ritters of the world. Unfortunately, in messy reality, people have skills that are domain specific, right? They are nuts when it comes to their sex life, but they may be wise about matters of weapons of mass destruction.
Had he tried to get into the elevator, he'd have been killed. As he made his way up to the other, tried to get into the guy's room, he'd have been killed. But instead, people just sort of step aside, and Tom Hanks walks all the way through the hotel, all the way up the elevator, comes in, nobody's at the door, opens up, and he kills the son. That's what happened. Trump was Epstein. All right? Trump was Epstein. There's no other way about it. You know, and people go to conspiracy theory. No, accidents like that don't happen in federal lockup. Yeah. Epstein was murdered on the orders of somebody. They replaced the guards with people who weren't trained. The cameras stopped working, everything, no documentation, and Epstein is killed. Donald Trump was Epstein. He's supposed to be dead right now. He's not supposed to be alive. We're not supposed to be talking about this right now. This is a huge, huge problem for the idiots who came up with this, because I don't believe that this was a well-planned operation. If this was a well-planned operation, Donald Trump would be dead. Yeah. I believe that this was a panic operation because take a look what happened in the courts. See, they, the establishment, the Democrats, the whatever you want to call them, have been trying to kill Donald Trump politically for some time now, and they have failed. And he just won some major court, the Supreme Court decision, Cannon throwing out the case. Their entire effort to make sure that he can't run for president has failed. And now he's up there. This was their last chance before the convention to get him. This is my firm belief. Do I have any evidence to back up anything I just said? Absolutely not, which is why I'm normally reticent about talking about it. But this has me so pissed off. I'm sorry to use the words, but because.
So if you lacked faith in the U.S. Secret Service, right, if you had any faith in the efficiency of the Secret Service, it was severely damaged by the performance of the head of the Secret Service. Right, a good friend of Jill Biden, loved by Joe Biden, a pusher of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she was an absolute disaster on Capitol Hill today.
Fox News alert, it has been 9 days since a would-be assassin nearly killed Trump in broad daylight, and the Secret Service director testified today and refused to answer any questions.
At any point Saturday, did the Secret Service have an agent on top of that roof?
Sir, I'm sure, as you can imagine, that we are just 9 days out from this incident, and there's still an ongoing investigation. And so I want to make sure that any information that we are providing to you is factual.
You can't, okay. Why did the Secret Service not, can you answer why the Secret Service didn't place a single agent on the roof?
We are still looking into the advanced process and the decisions that were made.
How can a 20-year-old with his father's AR-15 assault weapon climb onto a roof with a direct 150-yard line of sight to the speaker's podium without the Secret Service or local police stopping him?
So again, sir, I will say we are 9 days out from this event, and I would like to know those answers as well.
When this guy took the shots, he climbed a ladder to get on the roof, correct?
I'm unable to answer details of exactly how the individual accessed the roof at this time.
What? Cheatle hasn't even visited the rally site in Butler yet. You know what she has been doing? She's been hanging out in Aspen. Yeah. Cheatle didn't even call the Trump Secret Service agents until 3 days after the shooting. She doesn't even seem interested at all in what happened. And her answers are fishy.
Have you used any encrypted app to communicate from your personal device?
I do, on occasion, use encrypted apps to communicate.
How many spent shell casings were found on the roof?
Again, I would have to defer you to the FBI's criminal investigation.
Was Mr. Crooks acting alone?
Again, I would have to refer you to the FBI's investigation.
Does the Secret Service routinely record communications between and amongst detail?
Depending on the detail, radio communications are recorded.
Does the Secret Service have recorded communications from the July 13th event?
We do not have radio communications from that day.
So one thing we did learn today, in June 2023, mobile data revealed that an individual who frequently visited the home and work of Thomas Crooks, known for trying to assassinate Donald Trump, also visited a building near an FBI office in Washington, D.C. So what's the connection between Crooks and the FBI?
Do you have a timeline at all from any of the day?
I have a timeline that does not have specifics.
That's shocking. That is absolutely unacceptable.
What's a timeline without specifics? How did they happen to not record the radio communications? And did I just hear the Secret Service director refuse to rule out if the assassin had help? With all the lies they've told us about Trump, should we assume they're lying about this too? Show us what you have. Prove you're not lying. By the way, this is the Oversight Committee. It's the committee where everybody hates each other, but they all agreed that Cheatle should go. And it got pretty heated.
Has the Secret Service provided this committee a complete list of all law enforcement personnel that were there that day? Have you done that? Have you provided a list to the Oversight Committee? Yes or no?
I will have to get back to you on that.
That is a no. Have you provided all audio and video recordings in your possession to this committee, as we asked on July 15th? Yes or no?
I would have to get back to you.
That is a no. You're full of today. You're just being completely dishonest.
Whistleblowers have just come forward to say a Secret Service agent was assigned to that rooftop where Crooks fired from, but didn't go up there and went somewhere else instead. I asked President Trump and J.D. Vance for their thoughts on how the Secret Service has handled.
So other law enforcement who are assigned to the roof, they were up there for a while, but they left because they found it too hot.
This is an affront to the American people. This isn't politics as usual. This is an affront to the American people. I'm not the biggest Donald Trump fan. Actually, I'm not a Donald Trump fan at all. I am a fan of the United States of America, unabashed. And I believe that the differences we have as a nation must be worked out at the ballot box. That if you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. Go out and vote for the other person. If you don't like the other person, vote for, whatever you want. But to have the people we're supposed to trust with protecting the institutions. And it's not just the Secret Service. Understand that the FBI has to be involved in this as well. The National Security Division is involved. And these are the guys that initiated Crossfire Hurricane in 2016, totally manufactured case. These are the guys that, that criminalized a documents case that should never have been criminalized. These are bad people. These aren't good people. We have fundamentally bad.
Can't believe it, but I think I want to know what Sean Hannity is saying. My God, what's happened to me? I must be discombobulated.
And welcome to Hannity and tonight fireworks on Capitol Hill. More than a week after Donald Trump was nearly assassinated, Secret Service Director Kim Cheatle is refusing to step down or even provide simple, basic, fundamental answers, 9 days after the shooting? A complete dereliction of duty. She should be fired. She should have been fired. Her lack of answers, it is repulsive. It is dangerous to the country. Now, we're going to bring you all the highlights and reaction. Jim Jordan, James Comer, all.
Okay, let's get back to Scott Ritter.
People. And now it turns out we have bad people in the Secret Service because, Larry, maybe you can back me up on none of this happens if you have a good special agent in charge.
Yeah.
None of if there's a special agent in charge and the head of the Secret Service says we're swapping, you go, no, you're not. You're not swapping out. I'm in charge of this detail. Not only are you not swapping out, you're giving me the resources I want. Well, you fire me, I'll go to Congress. I don't care. This is a national security issue. This man, it has to be protected. This Secret Service was involved in this. And whether they knew what the outcome would be, I can't say. What happened here was not an accident. And this goes straight to the top of the Secret Service. This goes straight to the head of the Secret Service, but it also works its way down. Because again, the guy in Pittsburgh, why isn't he screaming bloody murder? Where's the professionalism here? Where's one aspect of professionalism here? Where's one person who stood up and said, hell no, that ain't happening. That's not happening. Not on my watch. It isn't going to happen. You're going to give me the resources I need, or we cancel the event. That's.
Okay, this is former CIA agent Mike Baker.
You brought up TikTok, your favorite topic of discussion. This is the first time that I've observed. Actually, I didn't even do this with January 6th, because with January 6th, I actually watched mostly Fox News, CNN coverage. I was watching things be streamed live. But on Saturday, this happened just as I was going for dinner here in Montana. And I, for the first time, realized just how important Twitter is.
So he was in Montana. Was he hanging out with Richard Spencer?
As a social media. It was a genuine utility for everybody that wanted to know what was going on. And I'm not going to Facebook to find out this information. I'm not going to TikTok to find out this information. I'm not going to Instagram to find out this information. I'm not going to the mainstream media to find out this information, like mostly peaceful but fiery assassination attempt from CNN or whatever the headline was.
Yeah, there were some headlines. There were some headlines that he was pulled from the rally because he fell down. And
Secret Service interrupts Trump rally.
Yeah. And, or there was a New York Times article just today that said that referred to the assassination attempt as that somebody shot at.
Right. So the news media in general is so unfamiliar with weapons, and they don't know the sound of a high-powered rifle, that it took them a considerable amount of time to admit and to recognize and to publish that shots rang out and that one hit Donald Trump. Right. If you have a familiarity with high-powered weapons, right, you would have known within a few seconds that this was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Yet the news media waited about 7 hours before they would admit that this was an assassination on Donald Trump. They had to have law enforcement bureaucracy come out and state that it was an assassination attempt.
The president during a rally. And
I thought the coverage on X was excellent. And I still find X excellent. Now, I'm very selective with the people that I follow. I did not find my feed overrun with nonsense.
Okay, so I agree with you. I think X has kind of proven its usefulness in this event over the weekend. Yeah, I spent probably more time monitoring what was happening there than I think pretty much anything else. Although I was perfecting a new TikTok dance, so I had to. That wasn't easy, but it's going to be a hit.
I tell you what else I didn't see much of. I didn't see much sort of crazy misinformation, wild accusations. I haven't seen much that people have really needed to row back. Now, is that the benefit of the platform, or is
I didn't see it either, and I don't notice social media censoring theories about a conspiracy to murder Donald Trump. So Republican pushbacks against disinformation appear to have been useful.
Even rely on sort of, what you may have been told. If your supervisor might say something like, there's a clear threat here, we can see him reaching for something, take the shot. Well, yeah, that might actually assist you because, it's okay, well, I had no reason to doubt what they were saying and they had eyes on better. But fundamentally, it's your own judgment. And you'll see in the video that, the Secret Service sniper sees something and is looking and objecting, and then he actually takes the shot. Now, we know a little bit more about the facts now, and I keep saying, it takes a while for the true facts to come over. But part of the issue here was that people 2 minutes before this happened were already pointing to the guy on the roof and warning the police. And 2 police officers actually went over to that roof. And one lifted the other up, and the other guy was pulling himself up. And actually, the first shot was at him. The guy turned around and shot at him. He dropped down. A few people have said, why didn't he pull his gun and why didn't he do anything? Well, because he was too busy ducking from being shot at. And I have to say, I don't usually give my personal opinions, but I find that quite a reasonable course of action. And then he turned and started shooting. But, it takes a while for shots to, to hear shots. So although 45 seconds when you watch it on a video, it seems like a very, very long time. If you're sort of going, is it safe to shoot this guy? Because what if he's just some either protester or Trump supporter? What if he just waves a big banner going, yay, Trump 2024? He's going to look really stupid. And more importantly, he's going to get prosecuted. Because the thing with use of force is, it's all or nothing. You are either entitled to use force, in which case you're completely in the clear, or you weren't, in which case it is murder. There is no halfway house. There's no, well, actually, you made a mistake, so we'll call it manslaughter, but you were acting with the best of intentions. It's all or nothing. And basically, Secret Service people, understandably, don't want to go to prison for murder. So we can look at all the...
Yeah, my biggest question 9 days after the Trump assassination attempt is Secret Service counter-snipers clearly seem to have crooks in their sights prior to crooks shooting at Trump. Why did the Secret Service deliberately allow crooks to get off about 8 shots at Donald Trump before they then deigned to take him out? Why did they take him out when they saw he had a rifle on the roof?
Inadequacies in the preparation and how and the procedures and what went wrong and what lessons can be learned. But fundamentally, and now we're hearing that as to who actually neutralised the chap, it seems that there may have been other people involved. But really, the reason they were waiting is they needed to make sure that person was a threat. And I know it sounds awful, but the safest way to ensure somebody is a threat is when they start shooting themselves. So there you go. As always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely interesting, vaguely accurate.
All right, here's Heather McDonald.
And they had a negative disparate impact on women. How many women are 6'2"? And so anything that
is that there were a lot of women who did not match the size and stature of Donald Trump around him, and there were definitely either protocols not followed or we're still learning. But what do you make of DEI as it relates to law enforcement, and even more than that, Secret Service protection of some of our most important figures in the country?
Well, the idea that explains about everything in our world today, Jen, is disparate impact. And that applies especially in race, but it also applies with sex matters. And I assume that the Secret Service used to have certain height requirements, and they had a negative disparate impact on women. How many women are 6'2"? And so anything that kept out achieving some kind of, or moving towards some kind of ridiculous, unnecessary, irrelevant gender parity would have been thrown out. I disagree with you. I do not think women should be in any kind of first responder roles. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. My self-identity or sense of accomplishment, which is not high, is not dependent on seeing quotas of females in the rest of the society. And I don't need a female role model. I think people should choose role models based on the accomplishment of scientists, of leaders. And if I were a physicist, I wouldn't need a female role model physicist. I would choose Einstein. So I don't, the sight of those ridiculous females around Donald Trump with their breasts and their fat, rolls around the waist, it's preposterous. We don't know. Now, maybe most of the threats are going to be gunshots, but if they ever need to take somebody down, a female is not going to be able to do that. It's the same thing in policing, and it's the same thing in firefighting, and it is sure as hell the same thing in combat units. And I don't know the tactical decisions that were made about the perimeter, whether affirmative action, racial preferences, sexual preferences.
I got a ton of reporting that I'm hoping to get to, but there's also some great people on that I want to get to as quickly as I can. So I'm just going to run through some highlights.
This is a
reminder for those or
10 minutes
letting those know who are new to Two-Way is a platform for substantive, long, fascinated by what's going on with the vice president. And while Donald Trump and Joe Biden are still obviously players here, what's going on with the vice president? There's so many different things. There's just incredible amount of developments in her first full day as the presumptive nominee, which is what she is now. So I'm going to run through a few things. Then I'm going to want to bring in John Lawrence, who was Nancy Pelosi's longtime chief of staff, who's got a strong point of view about the deep states. I'm going to want to bring in Tom Rogers, if he's here and willing and able to talk, who's written a very provocative piece about the vice president and her ascending to the nomination. And David Burrell, great pollster, who's a great friend of Two Ways, to talk about what the latest polls say and how we should read them and what we should expect going forward. As always, want to get you involved. Raise your hand if you want to get involved. We'll get to you eventually. And there's some other people I'm expecting who I haven't seen yet, but going super well that would make you think if you only saw these things, she's on a roll here. Grassroots and Fat Cat enthusiasm for fundraising is massive, record-breaking. We'll see if it sustains, but it's obviously always a sign, not just get you good press coverage and not just put the money in the bank, but that represents enthusiasm from elites, from the grassroots, extraordinarily important. And you can feel that throughout the party. Throughout the party, there's a sense of possibility and not the dread and antagonism that existed up until Joe Biden's announcement. She's on a glide path to nomination. The AP has reported she already has enough delegates to be the nominee. No one's running against her. All the people who might have considered running against her, never was going to happen. All of them have endorsed her. And I think, with the exception of the Republicans who are still carping about a coup and all of that, the media is not saying, there's something illegitimate about this process. There are all sorts of ideas about what the vice president should do across a range of issues. I'm putting that in the positive category just because there's this kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom sensibility now, a great enthusiasm to help and offer assistance. The convention now is a hot place to go. Celebrities, politicians, donors, whereas before Chicago was being looked at with dread, now it's a place where people are looking at to really be excited and be part of something. This next thing I'm going to list is a little complicated, and I don't want to be accused of mansplaining, but I'm going to do my best to say this right. There's a group of women, not just in Washington, but around the country, who are seared by and scarred by the experience with Secretary Clinton, and they have vowed to not let the press and the public and social media do to Vice President Harris what was done to Secretary Clinton. I've been outspoken in talking, particularly in 2008 and then again in 2016, but I saw it more severely in 2008 to some extent. The sexist coverage of Secretary Clinton and biased coverage against her, I was outspoken at the time about it. This group of women, and it's almost all women, are fierce about this. And it's a real asset because they're smart, experienced, substantive, and aggressive and fierce. And they're going to defend her in all sorts of ways that probably if they had this attitude and these programmatic ideas in 2016, Hillary Clinton would have won. Whether you think J.D. Vance is going overboard in his criticism of Vice President Harris or not, Democrats do, and they're feeling good about that. They're feeling in a fighting spirit about it, and Democrats feel now that Donald Trump's going to make a lot of mistakes, and Vice President Harris is going to be able to take advantage of those. That's my list of positives. Now, let me tell you the things that are going on mostly behind the scenes that are cautionary. Number one, the vetting of potential running mates. I've said this before. the vice president's not been vetted. I can virtually guarantee you there are going to be stories about her past that are going to surprise people and potentially damaging. But these 4 and maybe more possible running mates, they're just being vetted on the fly in a very ad hoc way. It's not clear to me that they've turned over any documents yet. And the clock's ticking, right? Even if she names a person at the convention, it's not that much time to do a normal vet. Cooper, Shapiro,
okay,
Bashir,
let's bring Kip back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, I was just going to touch base with you about that. You were trying to square it away in your head whether it was incompetence or malice, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, one good analog to this might be 9/11. You know how you used the term tonight, discombobulated. Do you remember how discombobulated they were on 9/11? If you were able to hear on some of those YouTube videos where they've played back all the people trying to talk to one another, even after planes had hit both World Trade Centers, and then that third plane that eventually hit the Pentagon was way out there communicating with the tower in Cleveland, Ohio. They still were unable to do anything between Cleveland, Ohio area and all the way back to the Pentagon, and never even got eyeballs on it, I don't think. So you would think, you know, if you just think to what we were led to believe about the American empire and how awesome it was, you know, just to know that they couldn't stop a plane heading from the Pentagon, and they had from Ohio to there to get it done. What's your thoughts on such a thing?
Yeah, I see American failures on 9/11 as incompetence. I haven't for 1 second considered that it was an inside job. And since a few hours after, well, upon seeing footage of counter snipers taking their time before taking out crooks, I have thought about inside job. So never once, not for a second, did I think inside job with regard to 9/11. But in regard to the shooting of Donald Trump, I have thought about it quite a bit.
Right. But you know, your conscience wants to lean towards like gross negligence, you know, kind of like 9/11. At least that's what mine is doing. I've never been a QAnon guy or an Alex Jones guy or a 9/11 guy. I share your cringe when you were mentioning Ritter earlier. So I know what you're saying. You really don't want to travel in those circles, if at all possible.
Exactly. And
also,
and I'd want direct evidence. So I'm just going to stand up and admit, as someone who doesn't just give a carefully considered commentary, I also will give a visceral commentary. My visceral side resonates with the notion that there may have been some malicious actions on the part of the Biden administration somewhere. Back to you.
Right. You're saying something is queer here, you know?
Yes.
That's earlier. I just wanted to make an observation when you played the clip from Heather McDonald. If you've ever noticed the women whose intelligence you and I appreciate, have you noticed how many of them actually think like men? You know?
Yes.
It's almost like under the hood, there's a man. There's part of a man down there, you know, but they're all women visually when you look at them.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I always thought that
Heather McDonald is like more of a man than most men I know in the best sense. I mean, very intellectually strong and courageous.
Right. You know, we were talking about, I wanted to kind of touch base with you about the role maybe that the media played in the zeitgeist from say 2012 to now, not just Trump, but just the whole zeitgeist. You remember the whole Trayvon thing when it popped off back in 2012?
Yes. It was a lot of push to portray him as, you know, some innocent, angelic young man.
Well, you being in journalism, you might even know the guy, but there was a fellow named Mark Strausman that brought this story to the world. He worked for Gayle King, but he had, I think it's called CBS Sunday Morning. And this was just a regional story down there in Sanford, Florida, until he brought it to the world. And I can still remember the computer generated imagery that he had put together. It was a real glorification of the kid. And then when the computer imagery came on, they showed a dark alley, you know, like a walkway. And then there was a small little figure, like a little 11 or 12-year-old little black kid with like a fruit punch in one hand and something else in the other. And a large figure walks up on him and gives him what my dad used to call a jap slap, slaps him real hard, and then shoots him. And that's the end of it. And that's the way it was portrayed. And, I wanted to go down to Atlanta where his production studio was and get in his face and go, where'd you get that from? Did you go to Benjamin Crump to get that? Because I believe that was the attorney for the Martin family. And they start off, what's the old saying? A lie can get down the street, before a truth has a chance to
travel around the world before truth can put on his pants.
Yeah, and Mark Strassman did that, and Gayle King, and I don't know where he got his facts, but from where we're sitting, and he obviously wasn't listening to any of the 911 calls. I went back to, at that moment when I was wanting to try to figure out the truth, I went back to hear what the sheriff have to say. And I remember the sheriff said something important. He said he had set down the both fathers and had them listening to the person that kept screaming for help on the 911 calls. And the first one was Tracy Martin, Trayvon's father. And he said, "You recognize that voice?" And Tracy Martin said, "No." And then they put George Zimmerman's father in the same room and said, played that someone screaming. And his father said, "That's George." So right from the very outset, what was played to us on February 29th on CBS didn't have anything to do with the truth. And it really pissed me off because it was real people involved. I mean, I know there was a kid killed, but there was also like that sheriff there in Sanford. He had to resign from his position. And these people that run this bullshit, they don't think about the human cost of any of this stuff. So that's just one thing that started off in 2012 that really, I think, was one of the primary forces that started these dominoes to where Black folks became, I don't know, impervious to criticism, responsibility, or anything close to it. And then right after that, you had that Michael Brown, that gentle giant who happened to be stealing stuff from the store, and then you were, these are stuff that I'm just thinking of because you were just talking about that decorum that they seem to use in the media. But boy, they act like they don't see it when someone like Hillary Clinton comes out and calls, what did she say? Half of Trump's supporters were a basket of deplorables.
Yes.
I mean, that's the tone that was set 9 years ago. And then my mind jumps to those Covington kids and the way the framing, the way the narrative is all of a sudden spun. And then they catch themselves in court, having to pay fines because they've gone too far down the Primrose path. And then even now you get to that stuff like the existential threat to democracy that everyone up to and including Biden was portraying. So of course, when something happens, Thomas cranks, no matter who did it. To my mind, the media has blood on its hands. Now, whether that comes from, I think that media shit, personally, this is just me talking on your show. I think it's all about social engineering. I don't think it's organic at all. I think there's three main parties. You got ad execs that they got to placate. You got the whatever political apparatchiks that apparently 99% of them, all except for Fox News, must be working with the DNC. And then you got the U.S. intelligence, the State Department, who this is probably where you would think I was going a bit over the line, but this is where I think that a lot of people don't see. But when you put it all together, I think they created the climate, the climate that we have right now, where people can't even breathe, and it pisses me off because I know 330 million Americans are censoring their own damn thoughts in their own head. True thoughts are being censored because they've been quelled by this machine to not even think freely. And that's where you and I talked earlier a couple of times ago, and I told you Jews have this uncanny ability to have unfettered thinking. And that's something that I don't see from everybody beyond that. Everybody except them. It's like they're constrained in this scaffolding that in many cases was built by the media and by their education system and their professors and everything, and they're just going along to get along, and you can't even speak to them without probably sending them into a full fit, if you tried to speak to them frankly about something. So I think that they should speak more like the politician who has to get the folks from the regular people who it's really supposed to be all about. I don't think we should be kowtowing to their elite way of speaking. And I'll close this by saying, I used to appreciate the way there was a class of people that could speak in a way to where they could dress you down, and a normal commoner wouldn't even know what the fuck they were saying. But that intelligence, that level of cleverness is gone from society. Whatever they're doing now in the elite end, it's a cheap imitation, in my opinion. But I've said too much. Go ahead.
Okay, no, that's great. I gotta move on for tonight. But that was some great commentary. So thanks, Kip. Good to have you back on the show, man.
Right.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
We'll continue.
I still think Kelly's the one to watch. Personnel. She announced today that she's keeping on the current campaign team. It's been reported that they're courting David Plouffe to come in. It is a big mess, and so far they're handling it okay. But personnel in a presidential campaign or any big enterprise, super complicated. The vice president doesn't have a great history of dealing with personnel. Keep watching to see how she gets this in place, building the airplane while they fly it. There's just too much to do. And I've been thinking about Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama. How would they be dealing with the reality of how do you spend your day? When do you sleep? When do you exercise? Do you still go to fundraisers? Which meetings do you go to? Who comes to the meetings? There's just a lot to do. And again, a lot of pressure. The vice president, not great under pressure historically. So that's another thing to keep your eye on, is how she's spending her time. The polls are mixed. There's enough positive polling data to not have people panic, but they're definitely mixed. And it's not impossible that if she makes a few mistakes early, that she could start to see a downward tick, and that could be problematic. I think the most serious thing, or I should say,
oh no, not something that's problematic. All right, Steve Saylor's got a good blog post. Kamala is old school. All right, Kamala Harris may seem diverse. All right, she doesn't look or feel or seem black to me. She just seems like a gorgeous, exotic woman with a wonderful figure and beautiful flowing hair and a pretty face and a great smile. And I think her laugh is adorable. But Steve Saylor notes Kamala Harris's biggest enthusiasm in life is for being an old girl of her paperback sorority. Nothing sets her heart aflutter more than the salmon pink and apple green colors of Alpha Kappa Alpha. So Kamala Harris is the most loyal Greek ever. Her sorority means more to her than anything else. They should make a black woman reboot of Old School, in which after the president dies, the Kamala character invites her old sorority sisters to move into the White House with her.
The most serious thing. But the thing I close with, which is a real problem, which Tom Rogers is going to talk about, is there's people who are saying, I can't believe we spent all this time and energy getting rid of Joe Biden as the nominee, only to get Kamala Harris, who has a lot of weaknesses, and the belief that anyone else could beat Donald Trump. The party may be turning to nominate the only other person besides Joe Biden who could not beat her. I don't agree with that, but I understand the point of it. She certainly has negatives. She's certainly attached to the administration, but these other people don't have experience. And she now has a lot of experience on the national, international stage. May not be enough, but hopefully Tom Rogers will come on to talk about that. But that's something that I've heard from several sources, and you're seeing a lot of people write that about her weakness. And some of them are suggesting it's not too late. Maybe the party should figure out a way to nominate someone else, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I want to call on a few people, and I believe John Lawrence has a heart out, as we say, so do.
Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate the invitation to participate in two-way. I would say that I don't have inside information, but I was at her side for 8 years. I think I had a pretty good sense of how she operates, and I think that her role was twofold. Number one was, and maybe highest priority as always, was to listen to and then reflect what the members of her caucus were saying and communicate that accurately. I think she probably would understand, and I certainly do as well, that Biden undoubtedly took that information with a certain grain of salt, because politicians do have a way of looking out for themselves. As Phil Burton used to say, after my district, I'm concerned about your district. But I think that the other piece of it is that Pelosi had a longstanding political and also personal relationship with Joe Biden. And I think that she was able to communicate something that went beyond simply the uneasiness of her members and that reflected some of the concern about his legacy and how he would be perceived if this campaign were to seriously go south and cost the House and the Senate and the White House. And so I think she was able to play that role. You know, Nancy Pelosi, as you well know, Mark, and I think most of the people on this call, she's a very hard political realist. And there were many times during the campaign, many campaigns that were conducted while I was her chief of staff, where she would have to deliver bad news to candidates, the candidates she liked, in some cases, candidates that she had recruited, that the numbers weren't there or that the money wasn't.
I have so much respect for people who can step up and deliver the bad news when that's necessary. Like those two tough women running the Dallas Cowboys cheerleader squad, as memorialized in the excellent 7-episode Netflix special America's Sweethearts.
There, or in the ground game wasn't there, and they were going to have to be cut loose. Publicly, she and the DCCC chairs would always deny that. But of course, they cut people loose because you had to concentrate your money. And I think that, you know, she brought that same frankness and, you know, with a strong overlay of personal concern, but still a frank.
So Mark Halperin is the best political reporter in the United States. He was canceled from his job at ABC News about 8 years ago during the Me Too movement. Apparently, he used his power and influence to try to seduce women who wanted to work for him or did work for him. It's good to see that he's bounced back. He's still at the very top of his game.
To those conversations, there was no question in my mind that was going to be done quietly. It was going to be done on the inside. All the noise that you heard in the immediate aftermath of the debate, demanding that Biden get out, that was obviously going to force him and his people into a very defensive crouch. That is not the way Nancy Pelosi proceeds. But nevertheless, over time, I think she made that case in all likelihood with increased forcefulness and probably with some increased public leaks that she was very discouraged about the status.
Right. This would not have been nearly as humiliating for Joe Biden if he did not deny reality, if he was able to listen to other people, if he wasn't so self-destructively stubborn, right? He should never have run for the second term in the first place, and it's an indictment of the Democrats that they allowed this.
The campaign.
Right. Two more questions about that and then move to Kelly. Number one, my sense from my sources is that when the history of this is written in full, the speaker's role will be much bigger than was seen above the surface. Would that be your instinct?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, okay. My sense also of her view of vice president, her fellow Californian, is similar to Joe Biden's view, which is high doubts that she can win a general election. So I'm wondering if you think she would have preferred a different nominee, but just saw the reality, or I'm wrong and she's actually enthusiastic about this. That would be her first choice.
You know, Mark, on that, I'm just going to take a pass because I really just don't know. Vice President Harris wasn't even in the Senate at the point where I left Mrs. Pelosi's staff in 2013, and I don't really know the nature of the relationship between the two of them. You know, she obviously they go back to the vice president's days as district attorney in San Francisco and attorney general, but whether or not they had, what the nature of that relationship is, certainly what the levels of confidence are, I would be inventing it. And I learned a long time ago not to speak for Nancy Pelosi.
Yep, all good. So now, Mark Kelly, I think if the list is really those four, Beshear, Cooper, Shapiro, Kelly, I think Kelly's the strongest. And I know that, I feel that in part because a lot of Republicans think it's the strongest. So you've written about this. I'd love for you to just explain what you see in Mark Kelly as a strong pick for the vice president.
I guess this is the point where I should say I just wrote a blog on this on my blog today. It's called Domeocracy, and whatever I say now is spelled out in some greater detail in that blog. I think that Kelly,
is that on Substack? How do people find that?
It's on WordPress. So if you just Google Domeocracy, it'll pop up.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I would say that Kelly has a number of strengths. Number one is I think it's always a good idea for Democrats to have somebody on the ticket who has foreign policy or military experience. Kelly has a long record, although he's best known as an astronaut for 4 trips into space. He also had a long record as a Navy aviator, 39 missions over Iraq, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, and many other awards for his long military service. And I think that that is useful both in terms of the expertise that it brings to Democrats with respect to dealing with national security, which is obviously a very important issue. And also the immediate military concerns we have with NATO and with Ukraine, but I think also because it will give the ticket the ability to contrast with some of the incredibly insensitive statements that President Trump has made with respect to not only veterans, people who have died in the wars, and we all know those very unpleasant quotes that have been attributed to him, but also that it allows, Mark has the ability to identify with his predecessor in the Senate, John McCain, who he has very strong feelings about and has tried to model himself on a bipartisan, or at least a less partisan type of interaction with other members in the McCain mold. And for that reason has emerged as a strong candidate in the Senate and won in a swing state. And I think building on that kind of military expertise and on the record of bipartisanship that, as contrasted, for example, with Vance or Trump, really gives him the ability, not having been in the midst of these the culture wars and the bitter ideological divide, allows him to play that role somewhat uniquely. I would just say the last point is that there's obviously an enormous sympathetic factor here, given the terrible injuries that were done to Gabby Giffords, his wife, when she was a member of Congress, and because of those injuries, how Kelly ended up getting into politics in the first place, which was never his intention. And I think that positions him to speak about the issue of gun violence in a responsible way. The group that he set up after Gabby's near death was not an extreme gun group by any means. It talked about reasonable bipartisan methods. And so I think he's able to send this message of coming from a border state, trying to reach across the aisle and doing so successfully, and filling up that gap that exists in Democrats very often on national tickets about national security and international affairs. I just think he covers those bases better for me than a good governor in a swing state that probably you can't carry. I don't know that you can carry North Carolina. I very much doubt you're going to carry Kentucky. And I think those governors, whether it's a Josh Shapiro or an Andy Beshear, they're going to work those states anyway. But I don't know that they send a national message the way somebody with that set of expertise and personal story that a Mark Kelly can. So I think on balance that he's a strong position for vice president and brings a lot to the ticket that some of those other good candidates don't.
Yeah, I agree with you about the national message. And I'm one who almost always says the vice president only does one thing. It validates the judgment of the presidential candidate that they can choose someone ready to be president. I think in this case, there may be an alchemy between them that would be more powerful than just the one state. Do you know him personally? You called him Mark. I don't know if that means you know him.
I do, because I was very close friends with Gabby when she was in the House. And I got to know Mark in his astronaut phase, not in his Senate phase. I've always been interested in the space program. And so I have gotten to know him, and I've stayed in close touch with him and with Gabby over the years. But that's not really why that doesn't motivate my evaluation of who constitutes.
Understand, but it means you have a feel for him. John, stay with us if you would. We'd love for you to chime in throughout if you're at the time. And I want to bring in Tom Rogers now. Tom also has Capitol Hill experience and has written lots of pieces about this race and concerns about Donald Trump finding a path back to the White House. So, Tom, I'd love for you to describe the piece you've written and why you feel strongly that the party may be nominating the only other person who couldn't win the election in the view of some.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I wouldn't go quite that far. The piece I wrote was Kamala Harris is the weakest of any of the talk about candidates. Whether she can win and pull out a victory here, I think, is another issue. But
sorry to mischaracterize. Go ahead.
The issue for me was going back over the last 12, 18 months. Every conversation I had with any Democrat, any media person, was the biggest issue Biden is going to have is his age issue, well before the debate catastrophe. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris isn't a good answer to that, because almost universally, people felt that if somebody had to take over for Biden, most would recoil from thinking that Kamala Harris was ready to be commander-in-chief. And some felt that she could be replaced without major political consequence. Many thought it was impossible to replace her without huge political consequence. Most thought that, hey, it didn't matter. She wasn't going to be replaced and she was going to be on the ticket. How we got from there to 24 hours after Biden steps aside, she is essentially coronated as the nominee, is somewhat mind-boggling to me. And it is further mind-boggling, not because of the history of how I think she was universally viewed as not being an answer to the age problem that Biden posed, but 5 issues that really stamp her in ways that none of the other talked about candidates have to deal with. And we talked about this yesterday on two-way, but just to summarize those 5 issues quickly. Being an incumbent today anywhere in the world is not a good thing. UK, France, India, She is obviously going to be tagged as an incumbent. Two, Fox News is already starting with this. She's concealer in chief. Anybody close to Biden knew that there was an issue in terms of mental infirmity. She was around him all the time. The fact that people think the best thing about Biden stepping aside is the biggest issue that the Democrats were facing was his age goes away. And with her being the lead, the nominee, that issue doesn't go away and is going to continue to haunt, particularly as the Republicans hit hard the issue of if he wasn't able to run, then he isn't able to continue to be the president. And she has to defend that, which is a mess of an issue to have to spend time being on defense about. Three, we know that one of two major issues that are the most difficult for the Democrats to deal with is immigration. She's obviously going to be tagged as the person charged with solving immigration. And that obviously is not a, if it's your most vulnerable issue, putting the person who has the greatest vulnerability on that issue at the lead of your ticket is questionable. Moreover, the best argument that the Democrats have is Biden came to agreement with the most conservative Republicans on the Hill for immigration reform, and Trump tanked it, yet she wasn't the one credited with that legislative accomplishment. So you can't put that up in her column. She was nowhere to be seen in terms of how that legislative compromise was talked about. Four, this whole narrative, the prosecutor versus the criminal, I'm not understanding. The whole point of the Biden administration, Justice Department handing off to a special counsel the prosecution of Donald Trump was to make that a nonpartisan, non-political issue, that justice needed to be served, that no man was above the law, and think of it as anything but a partisan pursuit. While I think they may mean something different than the prosecutor versus the criminal, when it comes to the specifics of the prosecutions against Donald Trump, it is going to be read as this is the person who is going to prosecute Donald Trump, and I think stands on its head the entire notion of depoliticized Justice Department pursuits. And five, as many have talked about, she is a weaker communicator than the others that have been talked about. She is fine in front of a teleprompter. She's fine with scripted questions in a committee hearing. But being a really good impromptu speaker who can prosecute the case against Donald Trump clearly and crisply with sound bites that are capable of overcoming the shellacking she takes on social media of all kinds, it's very hard to be that kind of communicator if you don't have that natural skill. That isn't to say she hasn't improved somewhat in that regard, but to be what she needs to be, starting from the deficit of the other four issues, I just think she's got another liability there that the others don't have. Yes, she is going to light up certain constituencies, I think, in a stronger way than Biden could have. And she is no doubt a very strong advocate for women's rights, which does count for something significant when it comes to getting suburban women in particular to the polls. I am not a particular, I don't subscribe to the tribal view that the difficulty Biden had with support from Black Americans, which I think it had to do with economic policy issues of inflation and immigration, are going to be overcome necessarily just because she is the offspring of an Indian mother and a Black father. And I think that, yes, unifying the Democratic Party is important. And yes, getting the money rolling again quickly is important. But nothing's more important than putting the best candidate forward. And for all those reasons, looking at her as the best candidate is hard for me to do. Can she win still? Possibly.
Tom, would you like people to read your piece and figure out a way to create an actually contested convention, or you just want to put your doubts out in the public square?
Well, the piece in Newsweek, I'd be happy for people to read. I think it's probably too late for a movement here. If the speculation is correct that she's going to have a majority of delegates wrapped up by Wednesday, I think that at least commitments from those delegates wrapped up by Wednesday, I think it's going to be too hard a hill to climb. But I do think I'm just surprised as a strong anti-Trumper how we got from she was a liability as a VP on the ticket, that a 24-hour coronation that she's leading the ticket, where there were many strong voices within the Democratic Party talking about an open process and trying to drive it in that direction. How this could have happened with all that sitting against her relative to other candidates is just very hard for me to understand.
Tom, thank you. Also, please stay with us. David Burrell, who works with Two-Way, he works for WIC Insights in Georgia, and David is going to join us now to talk about the polling. So, David, people have been asking me since I reported the president's intention to not seek the nomination about what does the polling say? Is she stronger? And what I've been saying is I don't care what the polling says, because we're now in about a 3-week race to the question of who's going to define Kamala Harris for the Americans who haven't been paying attention ever to her. Is it going to be her and her team, or is it going to be Mar-a-Lago? Some people have said to me just today very smart Democrats have said she's wasting the day. She went to the campaign headquarters in Wilmington. She did a sports event at the White House. They want to see her every day defining herself, because the Republicans on social media already, and soon on broadcast and cable, will be doing it, defining her in a different way. Tomorrow she goes to Milwaukee for a political event. I'm not sure if it's a rally or not, at 2:00 Eastern time. So that'll be a big thing of her in the battlegrounds. And as people have pointed out, when she talks now, it's different, because she's talking now not as the vice president, but as the presumptive nominee. So David, from what you've seen in the polling so far and projecting forward, just free form here, what should people be looking for in the polling now and going forward to determine her chances of beating Donald Trump? Hold on, David, you got to unmute. I apologize.
Come on, man.
Is for a couple of reasons, actually. So one is that, once Biden made his announcement, every single pollster in America went in the field for every single campaign. And we run a polling company. We know this very well, because we went in the field for all of our campaigns and all of our nonprofit groups, and every single person that wanted to see how is this going to impact the election. And that does have a dramatic impact on everyone's polls. So you might see polls kind of all over the place a little bit over the next few days. And as those polls kind of cycle out of the field, I think you're actually see something that's pretty great. And this is coming from someone who not over projected. We accurately projected Trump performing better than he did in 2016 and we did in 2020. However, at this point in 2024, I've actually thought the polls have been over-indexing his performance, and I think he has not been doing as well. And one of the reasons is I think that his supporters are people who are not anti-Trumpers. And look, there's Democrats who are not anti-Trumpers, there's independents who are not anti-Trumpers, and they're answering polls at a higher rate than the ones who don't like Trump, because the enthusiasm is there on their side. And the enthusiasm has been there on the, I'm not gonna say the Republican side, but maybe those who don't disdain Trump in the way that some others do for months now. And once the debate happened, it got worse for that, worse in this respect. And then after the assassination attempt, it even got more dramatic. So you're seeing a situation where in 10 days, and Mr. Rogers was right, that the media has done a 180 on Harris, and everyone's believing it. Feels like they are. And the enthusiasm is coming back. And the great thing about that is when enthusiasm comes back on both sides, is you get equal civic engagement, and polling is truly just civic engagement. And so I think you're going to see all people taking polls at, all subgroups of people taking polls at a more equal rate. And that's going to improve the accuracy of what we're going to see. I don't think we'll see it yet. I think we're going to see about 10 days. And this is also why when, I've been, benefited off this myself, actually, that, once you get closer to election, in September and August for the last few years, it looks like the pollsters are 10 points off. And then, right before the election, we get to say that we weren't that bad. But part of that's because civic engagement is very high right before an election. And so everyone's taking polls at equal rates. So kind of starts to level out our polling. I think you're about to see the most accurate polls we've seen in, this year. We'll see in about 10 to 14 days. And so I think we'll know where the race really stands pretty quickly.
David, thank you. Stay with us. I'm going to ask two people if they're willing to come on camera and unmute and let me spotlight them, who are two of the best journalists of the last several news cycles and beyond. Jill Abramson. Jill, are you willing to come join us? Let's see if I can lure Jill in here.
Sure. Fast and with an intensity.
Tom Rogers fears.
Well, I think, her upside is that, we're witnessing one of the great honeymoon periods of press coverage that I've ever seen. And, it's happened very fast and with an intensity that, somewhat surprised me, just how positive the coverage has been. And, especially focusing on the burst of fundraising, which is, a good sign for her. But, we really haven't seen her perform on the campaign trail yet. So it's impossible to know what in reality she's going to be like as a presidential candidate. I thought, I'm an admirer of hers. I should disclose that. I really thought when she was on the Senate Judiciary Committee, she was an excellent, tough questioner of the Trump judicial nominees. And, the height of that came with her confrontation with Brett Kavanaugh, which I thought was gutsy and smart and right, most important of all. I don't really buy into what people find annoying about her. I don't really care. I like her laugh. I like her voice.
Jill, let me ask you.